Hello everybody, I'm Katie Birtwell from the Walpole Historical Commission. In our last episode of Stories of Historic Walpole, we reviewed some of our town's most prominent buildings that are now gone forever. You know, there's always a tension felt in any town when somebody wants to tear down an old building. Will the town lose some of its history? Does the house have a spongy floor or termite damage? Is it an architectural gem or an eyesore? How much money will the owner make by selling it? Will the abutting landowners feel that its loss will change the character of their neighborhood? As the song goes, should it stay or should it go? Let's look at some more Walpole structures that are no longer standing in Stories of Historic Walpole, Lost Walpole, Part 2. Over the last 300 years, countless buildings have been built and destroyed in Walpole. Some are brought down by the wrecker's ball, a hurricane, a fire, or a flood. Since 1973, buildings over 100 years old or that appear on the state or federal list of historic properties come to the attention of Walpole's Historical Commission when their owners apply for a demolition permit. Commission members conduct historical research and go on a site visit to learn if the structure is historically or architecturally significant. If it is, after public notice and hearing, the commission may delay the demolition for up to 12 months. And the purpose of a demolition delay is to try to convince the owner to either rehabilitate the building or to sell it as a historic building. However, the law does favor the right of landowners within the law to do what they want with their property. What often happens is that after the delay expires, the demolition takes place. This is true not only for homes, but also for factories and businesses. The Big Four: Kendall, Fales, Bird, and Woodworkers. What do you do with an unused factory? This is a problem faced by cities and towns all across our country. One thing you can do is to restore it. But this is unlikely if the technology itself or the industry is obsolete, for example, our hoop skirt factory, or the technology has changed so that those huge iron machines are no longer necessary. Another thing you can do is tear down the old factory and build something else. This is what happened to Walpole's Big Four. Kendall, Fales, Bird, and Woodworkers have been either partially or totally demolished. Business and residential condos or apartments now poke their heads above the Walpole skyline. The bottom line is that the Big Four are gone. No Walpole resident will ever see them again. In another generation or two, no one will even know anyone who worked there either. Because that's the thing. Back in the day, not everybody got on the commuter train and went into work. A lot of people worked right here in Walpole. And it's kind of funny, but your social circle as a child might have been influenced by your parents' workplace. Bird employees tended to socialize with other Bird employees, and Bird kids played with other Bird kids. This isn't universally true. My husband was a Kendall kid, and he played very nicely with the Fales kids next door. So let's take a brief look at each industry, what it did, and what happened to it. Kendall Industries. The company that would become Kendall was organized in Walpole in 1903. Henry P. Kendall, whose mother was a Plimpton, bought the Lewis Batting Company, a small textile mill on West Street. This mill made cotton batting, carpet linings, and absorbent cotton. Kendall soon expanded its line to include various cotton, health, and hygienic products. Kendall was the workplace of both my in-laws for over 40 years. Kendall made a wide variety of familiar products. It made a non-woven fabric called Webril, which Kendall sold to Clorox, who packaged it as handy wipes. Kendall also made Curity diapers, gauze, and adhesive bandages for hospital. Now you may remember having a Curad bandage put on your cut finger as a child. Local kids knew better than to ask their mothers for a Band-Aid, the product of rival Johnson & Johnson. In the 70s, Kendall directors voted to sell the company to Colgate-Palmolive. Some years after that, employees were let go and the Walpole facilities were closed for good. On October 6, 2017, most of Kendall went under the wrecking ball. What is left is now a business development center and a residential apartment complex. The rest is gone for good. Walpole Woodworkers. Now you already know that Walpole Woodworkers didn't go out of business. It just moved out of Walpole, purchased by a private equity firm. Now known as Walpole Outdoors, the company is headquartered in Foxborough and makes furnishings made of cellular PVC, a type of plastic, instead of the cedar people used to expect. Woodworkers began on East Street in 1933 because the Allen family, who owned a construction company at that location, needed to sell the land during the Great Depression. Although the new company made some cedar fences here and there, most of its early products were made of white pine. In fact, after the hurricane of 1938 knocked down millions of white pines in our area, woodworkers built themselves a sawmill and went to town. Later, the company bought a forest of northern white cedar in Maine and began their decades of milling cedar. However, a few years ago, both the company and the land were sold. The few old Allen houses on site had been so extensively remodeled that little was left of the original structures. Standing there today, as you well know, is a 55-plus condo community. Gone from Walpole forever is the little wooden guy who spent years sawing wood for our amusement. Walpole Outdoor representatives assured Historical Commission members that he would be preserved at his new location. Fales Ironworks. Fales Ironworks, once on East and Elm Streets and now the site of an apartment complex, was a tough place to work. You dealt with molten metal and soot and a basement area that was frequently flooded. But it provided employment to many Walpole residents and for many years. The building itself dated from 1898. Fales manufactured and repaired special machinery and multiple needle sewing machines, of the type used in heavy manufacturing. This type of machine was invented by L.F. Fales' father, Charles Fales. Now, everybody in Walpole knows that the Fales family was one of Walpole's first families, and their earliest ancestors lie at peace in our oldest cemeteries. Now, after the Fales Ironworks went out of business in 1972, the facility became a tire store and a garage, the Rebel Bar, a swimming pool, and a restaurant. Finally, a development company paid the right amount, and the remaining businesses moved out. The old Fales buildings were razed in 2017. Today, no trace of the old ironworks remains, and residential buildings mark the spot where hundreds of people once worked. Burdenson. Now, everybody in East Walpole was involved with Burdenson in one way or another. Either your folks worked there, or your uncle worked there, or maybe you worked there. And many people in South Walpole worked for Bird Machine, which, like Fales, built production machinery for other factories. Bird also expanded into Norwood with its shingles plant, now owned by Certainteed. It had been founded in 1794 and was run throughout the years by a whole succession of Bird family members. It made all kinds of industrial use paper, roofing, siding, and other materials used in both industrial and residential buildings. When Charles Sumner Bird graduated from Harvard and joined the company in 1877, the company took the name Bird & Son, which it would keep for the next 100 years. Charles Bird remained the guiding force at the company for the next 50 years. He brought the company through fires and floods, and after his passing, other Bird family members kept the company going. We have Charles Bird to thank for Bird Park and other members of his family for numerous memorials and a library. In its heyday, the company even had a baseball team and a blimp. For years, the employees in the mill produced materials that every builder would need. The company survived the hurricane of 1938 and Hurricanes Carol and Diane, in spite of the massive flooding experienced on the Neponset River. Sadly, Bird's financial problems grew and persisted. An attempted merger with its competitor, Certainteed, led to antitrust concerns. Ultimately, the building was sold and all its content, and the once humming plants stopped production. Eventually, the Bird plant was razed. The massive machines were hauled away, and many of the brick buildings fell. Even the smokestack was demolished. Arson fires plagued the remnants. Ultimately, living units, small businesses, and shops were built in its place. An additional blow to the Bird legacy came when Bird Hall across Washington Street burned down in 1994. A surviving clock tower marks the spot where Bird employees once dined, mailed their letters, and shopped in Bird Hall's general store. I'll cover this story further in Stories of Historic Walpole, Great Fires. Other demolitions. We've just learned about what happened to our major factories and businesses. Let's take a look at some of the smaller companies and homes. The end came for these places too. The Fisher Homestead. This home once stood at 151 Spring Street. Back then, if somebody photographed your house, you stood in front of it. Here we see people on a horse, standing in the yard, and even peeking out the front window. The Fisher Homestead stood proud for many years until it was demolished so that a couple by the name of Ruth and David, Fisher I assume, could build a new home. Central Paint and Body Shop. Downtown Walpole always had liveries, so shoppers had a place to rest their horses, and garages so that shoppers could get their cars repaired. All are gone now, and the Central Paint and Body Shop, once tucked behind Herb Lewis on Elm Street, is no exception. At first glance, this building seems ordinary until you really look at it. Historical Commission member Roger Turner took some photos during a site visit after the owner applied for a demolition permit. He captured the beauty of this humble old structure. It came down in May 2004, and the area behind Herb Lewis is now, you guessed it, a parking lot. The William Robbins House. This lovely old farmhouse, built in 1710, once stood across the street from today's Johnson Middle School, where the leaf dump stands today. Robbins Road is named for the family farm, with its numerous houses and barns that once graced this part of Walpole. William Robbins' wife, Hannah Clapp, was the granddaughter of one of the owners of Walpole's original sawmill. This place was one of Walpole's old jewels until it was demolished in 1926, having survived for a total of 216 years. Danum Forge. You might remember antiquing at the old Danum Forge on Washington Street. I know I did. This venerable building was built back in 1828 as a blacksmith shop. Civil War veteran Captain Polly was the smith, and his name probably sounds familiar because Polly Lane is nearby. Danum Forge survived the hurricane of '38 in spite of heavy tree damage to its roof. In the 1980s, Joe Fellini opened it as an antique store. After that business closed, Danum Forge lay vacant for a long time. It was torn down on May 2nd, 2005, and you can still make out where it once stood on that crooked little piece of land on Washington Street. Thomas Claphaus. Did you know that the Plimptons, Lewises, and Kendalls were related by marriage? The one Walpole first family they did not socialize with was the Birds. These families spent decades suing each other, each accusing the other of polluting the Neponset River. In reality, both were polluting the Neponset River. During these times, the old Lewis batting mill on West Street became Kendall Mills. As Kendall continued to grow and build, it destroyed not one, but two historic sites. One of them was the Thomas Clapp House. I can only locate one picture of this old structure, but at least it will allow us to remember it. You can find it second from the left. According to the Walpole 250 calendar and its author Guy Sinove, the Thomas Clapp House is believed to have been built around 1750, and it stood opposite the Brass Ball Tavern on West Street, existing as late as 1924. Both the Brass Ball Tavern and the Claphaus were long gone by 1963 for Kendall construction and parking lots. The Morse Tavern. Now you can't just blame Kendall for tearing down old taverns. Burdenson did it too when they razed the historic Morse Tavern to put up an office building. The tavern was built around 1806 to serve stagecoach passengers. David Morse, the tavern keeper, was also Walpole's first postmaster in 1820. According to early Walpole historians, the Marquis de Lafayette stopped here in 1824, and Julia Ward Howe, author of The Battle Hymn of the Republic, gave a speech there in 1850. In spite of its glory days, Byrd tore it down in 1903 and replaced it with the iconic Triangle building. It was just a matter of time before the Triangle building, along with most of Burdenson, was torn down too. Everything changes with time. We've taken a journey all over Walpole to take one last look at places that are long gone. Want to see more? Look for Stories of Historic Walpole, The Hurricane of 1938, and Stories of Historic Walpole, Great Fires, coming soon. We're counting down to Walpole's 300th anniversary. Thank you so much for watching and for learning about the history of Walpole, the friendly town.